Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Takeup. Today we have episode 170, 5 things new embroiderers and digitizers need to do. All right, folks, welcome into the show. Happy to have you here for today's Takeup, talking about something that I talk about a fair amount, which is tips for new embroiderers and digitizers. And why am I on this again? Well, this is kind of following off from the big Fort Worth episode we had last week, where we're talking about most asked questions. Because when I go teach at the shows, that's one of those times I'm definitely going to see new embroiderers, digitizers. And funny enough, the reason I start by saying this for new embroiderers is because I'm going to talk about the beginner's mindset and how those of us who've been in the business for a minute and might have gotten a few gray hairs also can benefit from that beginner's mindset. And the thing is, when I say tips for new embroiderers, the funny thing is, I often see some of us who've been here a while in the comments. Truth being told, tips for new embroiderers are just tips for all embroiderers. So if you feel like you're getting stuck, maybe you're feeling a little uninspired, then some of these tips are also going to be for you. And especially as we talk about the mindset that it takes to continue being and doing great things, being great, doing great things in the world of embroidery and in the world of any sort of creative pursuit, and honestly, any pursuit at all. But we're going to talk about these things through the lens of these 5 tips. I always say it's probably going to be a shorter show. It might be, it might not be. It depends on how much you guys want to interact. But I will say, if you are here live, I definitely want to see you in the comments. Let me know the things that you wish someone had told you, the things that were important to you as you got started, the things you wish you had done if you've been here for a while, or if you're brand new. Let us know your questions. What are the things you're worried about? What is it that you think you probably should know that you don't? And we'll see if we can answer some of that too as we get going. Otherwise, we're going to jump right into it, and this will just be a conversation. Will there be some pictures? Will there be some other stuff? Yes. But today is not for me giving you numbers and instructions. Today is for discussing the things that help us be our best and set us up for success. Like I always do, though, I'm going to say hi to the folks who are here live if you are on the cringy AF hashtag replay squad. If you guys are here, I'm definitely going to say you can fast forward through this if you want to, but if you're live, we always like to say hi to the folks who are here and give them a chance to interact. Cindy King says, good afternoon out there in Texas. Happy to see you there. Love to see everybody else talking to each other as well. Zura is in. Happy to have you in as well. I haven't seen you around, so glad to have you in if you're new. Frank in from the UK saying good evening to all. Hi, Frank. Happy to have you in. Always glad to see you there. Joe Rita saying hi, and thank you, Joe Rita, for being there. Hope you're feeling well out there and see that you're doing great work on your landscapes again. Marta is in from Texas. We've got everybody saying hi to each other. Pam is in. Hi, Pam. Carol says, appreciate these basic episodes. Yeah, I think it's good to do these. I mean, honestly, we all need to return to the core sometimes. We got to return to the core. If we don't return to that base from which we built, sometimes we get lost in the details, right? I think that can happen quite a lot with all of us, myself included. I get lost in the details. I certainly get lost in all of the stuff I've done over the years, and then certainly in expectations. We're going to talk about that, the expectations you have for your own work, or the expectations you're projecting on other people about your work can be worse than the expectations they actually have. All right. So Melanie says, hey, Eric, happy to see you here, Melanie, as well. Glad to see you in. Remember you from class always, by the way. If you guys have been in my sessions, I don't remember everybody all the time or know everybody's name, but sometimes I'll see when you guys comment and I just go, I remember you distinctly from the time we got to talk in person. One of the great reasons to reach out. Got Kingsbury coming in, saying hi to everybody. Love that. People talking to each other. Marianne coming in from Santa Fe. Love to see some other New Mexico locals like myself. And yeah, love it. Jerry says back to basics. Love it. I love it too. Honestly, because the thing is, it's not always about the basics. Sometimes we're talking about our North Star, right? Our guiding principles that help us get there. And I'm sure there's somebody out there right now going, oh, Eric, are you overthinking again? Yeah, get used to it, man. I'm overthinking. Why? I'm a pretty cerebral dude. I live in my head a little bit. At the same time, some of that stuff comes out to mean real results. If we can define what's going on, if we can figure out what we're trying to do and maybe assign a term to it, figure out what it is, share it with somebody else, it might be what somebody else needs at the right time. Hey, overthinking for you? Cool. This isn't your episode. Maybe you're not very cerebral and you want to get back to me telling you how to work on small text. That can totally happen. We'll do that again. It's like I said recently, I was talking to the organizer over at Impressions Expo, which, by the way, coming up in January. Good stuff happening in Long Beach. So get ready for Long Beach, California in January. I'll definitely be there and teaching some cool stuff, getting into some of the technical stuff. But when I was talking to these organizers, no, I don't like to spill names unless I've asked first, talking to her and said essentially, you know what? It's hard to tell the cycle of when beginners are there or when somebody else is there. But the truth of the matter is, we're always going to teach small text. We're always going to teach embroidery basics. We're always going to teach 3D foam. We're always going to teach certain things that are just the mechanical necessities of embroidery. But when we can occasionally dip into something that's going to set people up with tools to teach themselves, to learn for themselves, to maintain their curiosity, to continue developing, that's where we get to reach out a little bit more. Like this last year, I got to teach presenting embroidery's value proposition, which was really all about making sure you are selling embroidery on its strengths, not apologizing for its weaknesses. And part of that is really kind of falling in love with the medium and knowing what it does that other media can't do. And I think that when we get to talk about that, sometimes it not only does it help us when we're making the case to customers about why this costs something, aside from the fact that we're spending the precious hours of our lives making these things, it not only does it help us with that argument or with presenting that point, it also helps us to fall back in love with the process, to get back to where we think about how cool embroidery really is and where we can get our curiosity ramped back up. It helps to invigorate us in our process too. And that's part of what I want to do today, invigorate us in our process. And that's the thing. And by the way, I love this intro, Rita, because I have absolutely done this very thing. So you are looking at, this is my mindset right here too. When you can't get to sleep because you're thinking of a better way to digitize something, you know you're hooked. Absolutely. You get a great idea and you can't wait. So you jump out of bed and start digitizing. It happens all the time. So we're going to talk about that. But yeah, that's what we're talking about today. Not some of the nuts and bolts so much. So we'll talk about that stuff later. Today, it's really about this concept, right? 5 things new embroiderers and digitizers need to do. Now, there's some technicality in here for sure. Don't get me wrong. But really, it's not so much about me telling you exactly some density settings and some inset settings or what kind of underlay to use. This is me talking about the process of getting yourself involved in embroidery, understanding what it is, what those steps look like, and what kind of things we can continue to practice ourselves to improve our practice, to improve our skills, to enhance our mastery of our medium, and to be excited, to stay happy about what we're doing with embroidery. And I think that's really it. That's what we have to do. If we're going to do this long term, if we're going to make it make sense for us, if we are going to, make something out of it that is more than just spending time and making money, a little bit more than that, we are going to have to do something more. So these are those 5 things. So under each of these 5 core kind of concepts, I'm going to talk about them and discuss it. So yes, actual actions for us to take, but there's a little bit more to each one, and I'll explain as we get there, right? So here's the first thing I'm going to make very clear. I'm surprised that I have to say this, but there's some times where I'm having people who first come into the industry or first come into the craft of embroidery, because you could be coming at this from the art, from the craft side, you could be coming at this from the commercial side, but invariably I'll have somebody start to talk to me about problems they're having or why their embroidery. In fact, this is the first thing they'll say, why does my embroidery not look like everyone else's? Why doesn't it look like what I see in a retail store? Now, there's a million reasons why that might not be the case. But the thing that always gets me, the very first thing, especially with digitizers, new digitizers, is they will bring something into their software, convert it in some sort of fashion. Often they'll take a very complex shape and fill it. They'll say start point, end point, fill it at this one angle, and then stitch that thing out. And though it may stitch, though it may run, sometimes not so well, it looks pretty flat. It looks pretty janky. A lot of the angles, a lot of the edges are pretty rough, depending on what it is. Often it's just a flat fill or maybe an auto satin stitch where it's breaking the satins into shapes automatically in some kind of fashion, but not great. And the first thing they tell me is like, man, why does this look like what everybody else is making? And I have to ask this question of some of the new folks. And this is maybe the most negative version of that. As I ask them, I'm like, hey, have you looked at embroidery yet? And the sad thing is sometimes this is part of the problem. When someone asks me, hey, why does this logo, this lettering, this design not look like everybody else's or not look like what I see on a retail setup? And the very first thing I notice is the stitch types don't look like anything that makes sense for this shape, at least in conventional embroidery. And I'm actually going to show you some unconventional embroidery in a minute and say that absolutely you can do something. You want a big flat fill in a letter that's a small letter? You can. There's actually reasons for it. I do it sometimes too, mostly for durability. You want to use a different stitch type than usual? Absolutely you can. You can make any mark with any stitch type you want to, and you can make it work if you understand your software, understand your system, you understand your machine. However, so many times I see people very frustrated, new digitizers, new embroiderers, with why doesn't mine look like everybody else's? Why isn't mine as clean, which is usually the comment. And frequently it's because it's not broken up into the shapes that others are. They're not using the stitch types that they have on another person's example. And yes, admittedly, they may not even know these things yet. We're going to get that in a minute. But the first step to making embroidery that looks good is to understand that you are on a body of work that extends back, hundreds of years commercially, kind of. You want to talk about that? We're talking about the way embroidery was done in a commercial space. We got hundreds of years. If we're talking about embroidery in general, we're talking thousands of years. There is a lot of embroidery for us to look at for examples of how we take a shape and make that shape out of stitches, out of individual lengths of thread, these individual colored lines of a solid thickness made up of twisted fiber. There's a ton of embroidery for us to look at. And in the age of the internet, when I first started and the internet was still in its infancy to some degree, when I was a teenager and first started embroidering, I went to the library, yes, the Dead Tree Library, and picked up book after book on any kind of embroidery. Hand embroidery, mostly because that was what was available, but any kind of embroidery I could figure out. I picked up every book. I looked at every image. I pored over and analyzed what was present there and said, all right, what is this? If I want to make a shape, how am I filling that shape with thread and it looks the way I want it to? You have to look at embroidery. And I know most of you are going to be like shaking your heads. Why are you saying this out loud so many times? Because even when we are comfortable in the kind of embroidery we're currently doing, I'm surprised how many times somebody will move to a new genre of embroidery. They will move to a new style. Maybe they look at a different type of art that they've never seen before. And they get very frustrated as they try and take this thing, they take this square peg and beat it into the round hole of the thing they already know, instead of saying, hey, I'm going to take a survey of what's out there and say, has somebody else done something similar before? And it's not that you're going to just copy everybody else's work, but it is that you have a knowledge of all of these other, think about this. All of these results are experiments other people have already done that worked out okay. Are they perfect, especially as we go online and we're searching random images of jacket embroidery, let's say? No. We're also going to see bad results, and we don't want those, and maybe we're not trying to analyze those, but we can still get ideas about how people blend color, what stitches people use for what kind of sizes of elements, what kinds of shapes in our art. We can look at how we break things up. Now, certainly you guys all heard my kind of fun term before. Retail research, that's when we go out to websites or stores and we look at things and try and figure out how they're put together. We just get an idea for what kinds of shapes are going together in this setup. Absolutely. But the thing is, we have to do this with more than just the look, right? I'm saying look at embroidery to make it simple, but it's more than just looking at things, which is why I call it retail research. Why? It's more than just looking at the embroidery. It's looking at the embroidery with curiosity. We have to establish and maintain our curiosity while we do this. So what does this mean? We don't really know what's up. We assume we don't know what's up. We take a look at what's there and we try and explain to ourselves in our own words why it is the way it is and what we're looking at. We'll get further into the technicality of this later, but the concept is we look with curiosity with an idea that we're going to learn. And the other thing is, especially if you are holding onto a piece of embroidery, absolutely, what are we looking at? Front, back, far away, up close. What do I mean? What's happening on the front of the design? Look underneath the sucker, look behind it. What's happening with the stabilizer? What does it look like? What do the tensions look like? And we'll talk about that more in detail later, but you just look at what the back of the embroidery looks like. Look at how the fabric is deforming. Look at the entire design for composition and setup and how it looks, and then look up close at the details to see how the design was taken apart. Front, back, far away, up close. Do research while you establish that curiosity. Keep that curious mindset, right? So like I said, people will say, all right, I get that when you're starting out. Does this ever stop? Absolutely no, it never stops. It never stops. And I'm going to go through some images here and show you. Apologies to my good friend Joe Kramer, who just taught at Fort Worth Impressions Expo. I'm going to show other stuff that I looked at, but some of the stuff I remember distinctly, I couldn't help myself. I took pictures of Joe Kramer samples. So Joe, come for me. I'm sorry, man. If I shouldn't show samples, I'm apologizing. But what I will say is go see Joe Kramer's classes as he keeps on teaching. Go check out his podcast. Go check out his videos and his website. But I couldn't help myself. I took some pictures. I was like, oh man, Joe did some cool stuff with sewing thread that has some fuzz to it. And I'm like, man, I want to see those patterns. Look, what a great way of filling that fleur-de-lis. He did some great overlap satin work. You guys know that I love doing overlap satin work myself. So I'm like, man, check that out. Overlap satin work. I can see a back stitch here. What's this kind of weird split stitch? Looks like a back stitch because we got 2 stitches out here and this kind of travel stitch in between them. Very cool. Check that out. And then I'm like, all right, well, I've seen the front of that thing. What do I got to see? I'm going to look at the back of it too. And the back, he's got it completely washed away. So complete wash away stabilizer. Very obviously, we got big wide satins here because we see these really long bobbin stitches. And I'm like, man, that is on, that is on a light knit garment. Is there some distortion? Yeah, but we're still cool with that. We're looking at that piece going, that's interesting. And so does this stop? No, it never stops. You always maintain this curiosity. So I'll show you a couple more of Joe's pieces. He did this really great piece for Joe's Crab Shack. And honestly, what am I looking at? I'm like, okay, how is that put together? We're going to talk about learning the lingo in a second. That's number 2. But still, I'm saying, what kind of stitch is this? We got this fill stitch going on here. It's nice and open. He cut out this background area because of the heaviness of this thread, something he talked about in his class. I see some splitting going on in this O and the E. It must have some sort of auto split or length limit. Once I know my software, I can talk about that more. But even as a beginner, I can say, oh, that's interesting. Those stitches don't go all the way across. They break in the middle. I wonder why that is. It looks like it holds really tight down to the fabric when it breaks in the middle, even though I see a little color in the middle when I do that. You can be curious and think, why is it the way it is? What is it doing? What is it achieving? And even we're talking about random commercial stuff. My dad, who's a mechanic and who has cool mechanic stuff laying around and buys parts, he gave me a Napa racing hat. Is this the most impressive hat on earth? Absolutely not. Is there some interesting stuff to look at? Sure. I'm like, wow, they made some different decisions about stitch type here. They decided to make that outside that Napa logo in a single color out of satin stitches. I probably would have done a fill with a satin border on that thing, but you know what? The satins work. It's not bad. We got some vertical satins on a hat. That's risky. Sometimes you'll end up with some dents in the center, but it looks okay. I'm not too upset with it. And so I look at it, I'm like, wow, that's pretty fine work on the back strap area there. Or on the side area. We've got a pretty nice little piece of text, nice tops and bottoms on it, nice straight stitch built registered trademark on it. Nothing bad. So I'm taking a look at it. And you better believe if I'm taking a look at that side of it, I'm looking at the inside. I'm like, all right, looks like what we have here is some sort of adhesive tearaway because it's stuck on pretty good, but layers of it are already peeling off as they run this thing out to shipping. So I can tell you what kind of stabilizer that is. And admittedly, if you're brand new, you might know, but you would still say, okay, so they used some of that embroidery paper on the back. You know something. You can look at it and say, okay, I guess that means they must use some of that material there. Looking at this other side panel, nice fills around it. It looks like it's also got a little bitty bit of tear away on the inside of that 9 as well, but it's got some tails. You can see what's done with it. But when we look at the front, we got some real clean registration, but we got some other interesting things going on. If we look up here, we actually have some tilt. This is actually more like a back stitch itself as well. We got a little bit tilt here, or a stem stitch. It's not just an exact straight stitch on it. There's a little tilt on those stitches as they go around to make a thicker outline on that 9 instead of just being a straight bean stitch. Kind of interesting there. Tried to kind of get that contour a little different. That's something to look at and to puzzle over. And just as someone who's looking at a garment, you go, wow, they went ahead and did a woven tab for the Velcro closure here, and they sewed down a woven tab on the back. Now, this is panel program done before the piece was put together, absolutely. But just interesting to see what's there. And also, as somebody who beats themselves up, go, wow, it's a little messy, but they let it out the shop like that, and they're not unhappy. Maybe I'm beating myself up a little bit too much about my quality stuff. That's the thing. We're maintaining curiosity. And what do I mean by that, right? Well, this is what I call the beginner's mindset. Beginner's mindset should be something like this. And if you're a beginner, I want you to have this mindset. Don't be me. Don't be a perfectionist. Don't beat yourself up. I talk about this all the time. I tend to beat myself up about stuff. But the real way to make the beginner's mindset work for you, whether you are an actual beginner or somebody who's beginning again, is to have this, right? Expectations are low, curiosity is high, and humility is on. What does that mean? I don't expect much of my output at first. I'm learning. That's cool. I'm learning something, whether that's something you're just starting out or some new technique you're bringing in. Expectations low. I'm learning. I should mess some stuff up. Like I said, don't be me. I don't always give myself this space, but I'm going to tell you to do it. Be better. Uh, Curiosity is high. Why is this the way it is? Is there another way it could be? Can I do this with what I currently have? Are the materials that are there for a reason? Curiosity high and humility on. Just know you're like, you know what? I might not know this stuff yet. That's cool. But also, I'm not going to run out there and chase someone down and tell them they're doing it wrong. I'm going to keep the curiosity high first. Are you going to see processes out there that don't work, practices that don't work, stuff people are doing that really doesn't fit with a commercial output or that doesn't fit with the way you want to make your art? Cool, yeah, but humility on. At first, we're just looking. When we're observing, we are just a big transparent eyeball. We are there to observe. We're not really engaged in it yet. When we get to the practice stage, we're engaging, but beginner's mindset, expectations of yourself low, curiosity high, humility on. If we can do that, if we can maintain that, we're going to learn more in the long run, and we're going to feel better about the process. So like I said, does that trip you up? It trips me up all the time. I mess stuff up and I'm like, man, I'm an expert. I should do this. People are calling me an expert all day. But what I have to remember is I'm always beginning again in every new project. I'm always beginning again in every new thing. And if it doesn't turn out exactly how I want it, also, that's not always a problem. Sometimes happy accidents are worthwhile things that turn into more. You never know when that's going to happen, but you got to keep that curiosity, that beginner mindset. And that's the thing. Understanding that beginner's mindset is valuable is something we don't always do. We want to race to the end point of this thing. But if you want to continue to get good, continue to build mastery, continue to be more than you were, the best thing you can do is love the process. I know it's a cliche. Sometimes cliches are out there because they are meaningful over time. Loving the process, loving the medium is the only way to continue to get better, for real. Though, yeah, there's some good stuff on there. I have to see some comments here. Mike says, that trademark, though, yeah, man, that registered, that circle R, chef's kiss. Whoever's doing the embroidery and digitizing on that, fantastic work, right? So happy to see it. It's always good. But for real, it's one of those things. You just have to think about it. You have to think about it. Cindy says a couple different things. Cindy says, I have two brands of machines that aren't so exactly the same. I can tell which logo came off which machine. Absolutely. That's possible. And I'll tell you this, I've made files to adjust for a particular machine. But here's the thing. If you aren't curious and you don't take notice of that, you might not know that. You might not figure that out. The other thing to remember too, sometimes the customer is probably not measuring the way we are. Look far away, look close, understand what's going on, and a little forgiveness. Here's the thing. Don't chase the last 5% of quality as hard as you chase the first 95. Because there's a good chance that you're going to get to 95% where you want to be. And that last 5%, heck, that last 10% of getting to perfect will take you an equal amount of time to that first 90%. Don't chase that last 10%. Once again, don't be me. Sometimes I've done that, but don't chase the last 10% because we have to understand who our audience is and what it's meant to do, you know? And Cindy says, I've never heard that term, dead tree library. Hey, in the world of digital everything, I always say, yeah, real honest to goodness, dead tree books, man, real paper books. I still sometimes check them out. By the way, hello, Anton. Happy to see you in from Romania. Happy to have you there. And yeah, that's the thing. Jurgita says, that's why I do what I want. I am me, not anyone else. That's important. Even if you're a commercial person, we're going to talk about this later in these things we need to do. Some of the things we need to do are things for ourselves. We have to do some self-directed projects. I know I've talked about it before, but it's something that all embroiderers, all digitizers should be doing because it helps with the beginner's mindset. Remember, expectations low, curiosity high, humility on board. We're trying to maintain that throughout our career if we can. So like I said, first thing is, look at embroidery. Never stop doing this. I'm going to bring up samples again and again as we go through here randomly, just to show you, yep, looking at embroidery. Yep, trying new things. Yes, doing projects for yourself. Always look at embroidery. No matter what you're doing. When you see embroidery, look at it. And honestly, it's the other thing that I'm not even going to bring it up on screen. I say it so often, you can probably follow after me if you've been here for a while. Consume broadly, create with focus. Look at all manners of fiber arts, all manners of art in general. Look at design. You're in a creative field. You're in a visual field. Look at all these things and take it in. And especially all manner of making marks with thread and yarn will be somewhat instructive to what you do as an embroiderer. Absolutely. Can we tie a knot above the material like a hand embroiderer? No. French knots are going to have to be some sort of simulated thing. However, we are making marks with thread. If other people are making marks with thread, are bringing thread together, even up to and including knitting and crochet sometimes, there are things about textures, about colors, and the way thread and yarn work that can be instructive and help us think through our process or show us something cool, right? And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the samples one more time to see if I can show you a couple more. I've got a lot of stuff that I threw in here just because I wanted to have plenty if I decided that I wanted to kind of bring this stuff up and talk about it. But in some of these samples, I've got some random stuff just to show you for fun. Lovely stuff from Joe. That actually is real commercial because he was doing, R&D for Abercrombie and Fitch, among other things. So big shout out to Joe. There's lots of other things here we're going to talk about, but I've got some random stuff in here. Like this one. This is something I stopped. We were at an import store that had a gardening section, and in the gardening section of the import store here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I saw these. Now, these are hand embroidered panels. Don't get me wrong. Hand embroidered panels that are imported. This little foam trucker hat's selling for about $30, and it should, because these pieces are hand embroidered. I don't know where they were hand embroidered from. It does look very much like Central American design to me, but that is to me, and I could be misidentifying that for sure. So I apologize if I did. But these sort of floral motifs, these bohemian motifs, these are done thick floss by hand. But can I learn some cool things about what we can do with this edging style, this fringe style, this split stitch, satin directions, color, layout, maybe how it would look if I did a full panel program? Can I learn some things from this? Absolutely. Look at some of the ways we got some couched work going here with some blanket stitches over satin. Blanket stitch over satin was a totally cool idea with a slightly contrasting color. Why not? That is a great idea that we could totally do in our embroidery software. Seriously, same column edge. We could have a column and then the line of the outside edge, the column being a satin stitch and the outside edge being an E stitch or blanket stitch with the E tines sticking toward the center. That is a thing I could do right now in my software. And if there was something I was looking for to get this kind of bohemian folk embroidery aesthetic, I could totally cop that idea and it would be a great inspiration. The inspiration is everywhere when you look for it. And honestly, when you're looking at commercial embroidery too, you have to think about it though and kind of define it. We'll get more into that. You guys know wherever I travel, whatever I do, every time I am in the gift shops, I'm looking at what people are doing. We're doing multimedia with print. We're doing multimedia with foam and ragged applique. We're doing sublimation with some with felt underneath it and with a straight stitch tack down. These are things we can exploit later in our own work, even if we don't do exactly what's there in front of us. So never stop looking at embroidery. Never stop looking. Look at embroidery whenever you can. If in doubt, take a moment to look at some more embroidery. It can help. But the other thing I want us to do is think about some, like I said, we've established our curiosity. We've got our beginner mindset. The other thing is, if you're brand new especially, learn how the machines work. And yes, there's more to this. I'm not saying you have to become a technician. I'm not a technician. Honestly, I did less work on my own machines than a lot of you folks out there do. There are people in my comments right now who have torn down way more than I have. Very luckily, I worked in an art department for most of my career as an in-house digitizer. Yes, I operated a lot. Yes, I could tweak the machines and settings. No, I usually didn't take them apart, only when I had to, and usually with help. So that's something I'll be honest about. I wasn't a machine operator. I was a machine operator, not a machine technician. Maintenance more than I did teardowns. At the same time, you have to learn a little bit about how the machines work, right? And certainly, the one thing I'll bring up on screen for this, because I kind of always bring this up and everybody brings it up, but it is worthwhile to think about. I am shocked at how many people don't really understand what's going on as far as this interlock sewing machine setup. Because this is a sewing machine, this is an embroidery machine, this is how the thread works. We're looping around the bobbin, they tie together, and depending on tension, you can see that in this case, we're doing a sewing operation with two pieces of fabric, and we're trying to maintain the tension so that the two loops meet in the middle inside of the thread, the fabric layer. This is what we're looking at. This is how an embroidery stitch is formed. And that basic understanding, surprisingly, is not with a lot of people who really want to get into embroidery. They love the result, but they don't kind of think about the process. And it's a little damaging. to your ability to deal with the machine and to kind of just cope with the things that can happen. Understanding how a stitch is formed right now, you can already see if you're looking at this and you hadn't thought about it before, and you start to think about bobbin tension playing tug of war with the top tension. If you hadn't ever thought about it, this will immediately let you know if you're seeing tension problems, why they're happening, or at least a plausible explanation of why I've got loops on top or why I've got birds nesting in the back, because of the tug of war between the top thread and the bottom thread. And it starts to become very reasonable to you if you start to think about how the machine actually works and forms a stitch. And it's a little bit more than that, right? Certainly we know some of these things, but the big thing to take out of this, not just operation, because you do need to know machine operation. You need to know how to load a file. You need to know how to trace a file, center things out, start positions, run a trim. All of these things are necessary. So yes, machine operation. Absolutely. How to adjust speed. How to set a color stop if the color stop's not popping, or popping a stop for you if you need to have a stop or a frame out or whatever else. Yes, you need to know these things. But in this case, what I'm really getting into is the basic operation of interlock sewing. You need to know what's going on that scale, and in the embroidery specific scale, things that might change the way something looks in the hoop. So how does a problem or an adjustment affect what's happening in the hoop? That's what you really have to understand, as well as, of course, the basic understanding of how machines move, how fabric reacts. But certainly the basic stuff, tension of the threads, the tension of the hoop, the speed at which you're running, perhaps your needle selection and what that means. Yes, that's not exactly machines working. There is something to that, especially because we know different needles can affect a little bit of how we're dealing with that loop formation. But understanding at the very least, at a beginner mindset, at the very beginning, knowing how problems are present and what's going on as far as adjustments, so that we're not necessarily blaming the wrong thing when we're getting results we don't understand, or when we're getting results we don't want, we can address those directly in a reasonable, fairly scientific way. If we don't know how the loop is formed, if we don't know how the machine moves, if we don't know how it trims and stops, if we don't know how these functions work, we're never going to get that far in controlling it. So you need to know how the machine works. And I mean on a fairly fundamental level. Does this mean we're going to be technicians? Not necessarily. Do we need to understand what the different parts are and how they come together? Yeah, you do. You need to understand the reciprocator pushing the needle bar. You need to know what that is. You need to understand color change and how it works. Enough to know when things aren't right on the machine, and you need to know how things are affected in the hoop when tensions are off, or what could be a tension problem. I can't tell you how many times somebody has an issue with something they're working on, especially a new digitizer. We'll talk to somebody, or a new embroiderer. We'll talk to somebody online, and they're having some sort of issue with quality on an edge, often with a little bit of looping going on, something like that. And everybody will run in and go, bad digitizing, bad stabilizer, invariably tension is off. And when you're looking at it, you're like, all right, let's go rational here. It's not the kind of looping that's up on top. We've got some loops I got a satin stitch edge and there's little loops sticking out to the side. That's not a tension issue because the loops don't even come from the same direction as our satin stitch. That's some underlay sticking out. Bad digitizing? Maybe. Certainly we need to change our inset levels on how far in behind that satin stitch our edge run is. Maybe change the kind of underlay we're running. But I know that it's not tension because I'm not seeing something happen between that tug of war if I understand how the loop is formed. And I'm also not just like, oh, bad stabilizer. Stabilizer, can it affect looping? Maybe a bit if we get really tense. If we have a lot of material all together, we got a big stack of stabilizers. Maybe we're causing so much friction we're assisting some loops to hang out on top. Fabric, can it cause looping? Yeah, it can. But once again, if that loop has nothing to do with the direction of the top stitching, if that loop is coming from somewhere else before the top stitching runs, highly unlikely that those things are there. If we know what the loop formation is like and we've run some designs, which is something we're going to talk about again, that's something we're going to figure out. So know how the machine works. Honestly, I think anybody who's here with us right now, you probably do. But if you're thinking about it, if you're just adding embroidery, ask questions, actually get down to the nitty gritty about the adjustments that are possible on the machine, and find out what those adjustments, like if you have a knob or a button on your machine and you don't know what it does, take time to learn. it's worthwhile to understand how those adjustments affect things. And like I said, certainly, how does a problem or an adjustment made on the machine affect what's happening in the hoop? It's the most important thing we should be able to know. And if nothing else, if you were alone on a desert island with an embroidery machine, turn the knob and then see the difference and then turn the knob back where you came from. Yes, that sounds crazy. Sometimes that's all you can do. And honestly, I learned very much on my own without a lot of resources. I had machine manuals and software manuals and time when I first learned to digitize. And certainly as an operator, I did luckily have an operator to help me learn, but someone who had mostly learned on the job and wasn't thinking about it probably at this level. Certainly, this is what I would want to look for. This is what I'm trying to figure out. So learn how the machines work and once again, maintain your curiosity. Why does it do that? Why does it interpret the file like that? Why does it jump right there? Is there something that I can do differently? Why is there a loop? Why do I have more color on the bottom than I should? Why do I have bobbin on the top? What does that mean? Where are the places where I can adjust for that? And certainly we all know a lot of it. Hey, if it's tension problems, check that bobbin, clean under the bobbin spring, check that your bobbin's not out of round, things like that. And that's stuff we know from talking to people and from running and doing operation. But in general, being curious and watching how things work and trying to reason it out for ourselves, as well as looking at the resources that are available to us, can help us get there. And that's kind of surprised, right? And that's just one of those things. Thinking about how things are put together for real, no matter whether it's the design area, and we'll talk more about that, whether it's the design itself, whether it's the digitizing side of things, we're going to talk about known good designs and analysis in a second. Watching something run certainly helps, but knowing how the machine works in the first place adds a layer of meaning to it. We're going to go ahead and grab a comment from Mike, which is good here. I've used that very animation before to explain to people why we have to think of embroidery as drawing with tiny toothpicks. That's such a great way to put it. Yeah, I always try and make them imagine that imagine that you're an ant and this is a rope that you're pulling through this thing, that we're really pulling cables through a big layer of stuff and pulling them tight. So we really think about those forces. But yeah, he says it's a series of straight lines, either stacked or in line. Helps tremendously with customer education. It's also how I've explained blending to people. I'm like, all right, take a set of colored pencils. I don't mean colored pencils we draw with, but like if we had a big stack of red and orange and yellow pencils and we tried to make a gradient from one side to the other, all you can do is just interleave those pencils, stack them in different orders and different ratios, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 1-to-1, and we could get a gradient, but that's all we can do. It's shading with Lego. You know what I mean? These are physical objects that have a set thickness. So yeah, absolutely. It's a good way to go. And then Carol says, I would love a week alone on an island with my new machine. I would love a week alone on an island with any machine. I think it might be the week alone just to practice. But let's just say, maybe I want to make some stuff for myself once in a while. Just saying. I probably could. I should take the time. Hey, 100% responsibility. I need to make the time to do that because I'm about to tell you to do that. All right. So the second thing, learn how machines work. That's the second thing. Let's go to the third thing already, because like I said, this should be a shorter show, but I think these are important things for people to think about. And if you're brand new, especially if you're coming to this, you're brand new. I know I'm talking about frustrations with brand new folks sometimes, but know that we want you here. I want you here. I'm happy to teach you. Many of us are happy to teach you. We've been here for some time, and I can't wait to see the new things you do that are different from what we do. Trust me, we want you here. We want to see what you're doing. However, what I will say is these steps are things that we figured out over time that we would love for you to figure out. The next thing is learning the lingo. And it goes beyond that, but we're going to start with the concept of learning the lingo. Why do I say learn the lingo? Essentially, there's more than the lingo there. Once we start to understand the jargon, the terms by which we define those things that we are looking at, right? When we're looking at embroidery, when we're trying to figure out, we're trying to explain things to people, if you are an embroiderer purely, this is also helpful once you go to a digitizer to know digitizing terms, because digitizing terms, interpretation terms, embroidery terms help you to ask for the things you want or explain what you're looking at or want to see. But in general, when we're also just looking at embroidery and when we're eventually doing file analysis, when we're running files, then analyzing them in our software, we need to know what we're looking at so we can understand how to control it down the road. So both in the operations side and in the digitizing side, so embroidery operations and in digitizing, one of the most important things we can do is actually learn the lingo. Why? The lingo has encoded in it a lot of what we need to know to control our stitches, to control what we're making. So I'll kind of put it this way. Instead of just saying, oh, you need to learn the jargon, it doesn't mean it's just so you can sound like you know what you're talking about. That's that's a great bonus to when you're starting to talk to your vendors. However, what is it for? Learning lingo is to say this: how do we describe what we see or what we want? So I'm looking at embroidery and I want to describe that. And I need to be able to look in my software or talk to support or something and ask them for the kind of thing I'm trying to show that, like, I want to figure out how to do this and I can't figure it out for myself if I'm asking for support or asking a digitizer or talking to someone about my machine. If I can't describe what I'm looking at or the things that I'm trying to achieve, it makes it harder to achieve them or to ask for help. So certain things we always talk about, right? Like stitch types. That's the basic one that we always start with. The types of stitches, like Mike said, ultimately there's one type of stitch. It's one line from point to point. We can stack them up or change the orientation of how they are in relation to each other. That's pretty much what we can do with it with an interlock machine like you're looking at. You can make a straight line on the surface of a garment or workpiece. That's all you can do. However, we do have words for how we stack these things up. A column of unbroken stitches that go all the way across that column. And we have a perpendicular stitch and then a stitch that branches off to an angle. It travels to the next point. That is a satin stitch. If we understand what a satin stitch is, also why is it called a satin stitch? Because it's shiny like satin fabric. Because of that long unbroken stitch, satin fabric has in its weave a long unbroken thread on the face of that woven material so that it's shiny. Because long unbroken threads without any penetration points, any sinking points in them, are going to be shinier, long, shiny stitches. So that's satin. That's why we call a satin stitch a satin stitch. Knowing that is going to help us describe what we're looking at and figure it out. So whenever we're looking at something new, the thing we want to try and figure out, now sometimes this is just up to us to look at it and figure out, or to try and figure out this jargon by reading glossaries. This is part of what we have to do, or looking at examples. But we want to ask ourselves these questions, right? What is it? What is the thing I'm looking at? Whether it's a stitch type or a setting, or I'm trying to explain, how close the stitches are together, and we're going to get to that, it's density. But what is it? How is it measured? So if I'm trying to talk to somebody else about how much there is there, I need a measurement so that I can both analyze it, I can figure out for myself what's going on, but also so I can explain to someone else how something's measured. And I understand when they're talking to me about what this property is, what this thing is. How is it measured? How is it put together? If we're digitizers, how do I address that in the software? I'm looking at something and there's an area that has this stitch that's not all shiny, it's kind of broken up, and it's further apart, not closer together. All of you who have been digitizing or embroidering for a while goes, oh, that is a fill stitch of some kind. It has low density. And if we're in kind of a craft space especially, you might say, oh, it's a sketch fill, because that's a term that arose in the last few years for a design that uses a light open fill with light densities and allows a lot of the material to show through from the background. And that's the concept. If we know what that is, someone can clue in immediately who already knows the lingo. If we know the lingo, it's our pass to ask for what we need. And here's the other thing to understand that helps us know more about what we're looking at and what it is to us is how does this thing I'm trying to change, this measurement, this setup, this stitch type, how does it change the way the design looks, feels, or runs? So why do I want to think about this and maintain my curiosity here? It's because there may be a quality that I want out of my garment. You're like, I really want a garment that doesn't feel too heavy. It has to be nice and light. I need to understand what it is that's going on. If I understand that, number one, how machines work, how the stitch is formed, I know that I've got two threads that are sticking through there together, then I might think, oh, well, if I have a lot of those places where the needle goes down close together, they're probably going to be a lot of threads that are going through my material and probably be pretty heavy. What I need to understand is if I know the term density, I read that and I'm like, oh, density is the distance between rows of stitching. And by the gods, you're probably tired of me constantly bringing up this thing right here and saying, yes, density. Here we are again on a satin stitch measured from point to point from these chisel tips, or measured from one line over the second to the third. We have a measurement, and that measurement is density with our standard 40 weight thread. So thread, how is it measured? In weight. What does that describe? Thickness. Why does that matter? The thicker the thread, the farther apart these lines have to be in order to accommodate the width of those physical threads. If we think about it on a basic level and try and teach ourselves how these things work at that basic level, at elementary level, density is not a magical wizardry where if it goes up or down, somehow that changes a thing about how a design looks, and I need to learn the ups and downs and less or more. If I know how it's measured, what those numbers mean in different softwares, where I can adjust that in a particular stitch type, and what does it mean in relationship to the thread, I now have all of these tools. And hey, maybe it is magic, but now I'm the wizard. I can control these things. I can now control these things in front of me. If we're looking at a fill stitch, if you're somebody new, here is a fill stitch. It'll have penetration points along each of these lines, but we're looking at it really close in magnification. The density is the measurement of these courses, which is one return pass and one pass across. So here's our shape. We're passing across. And what we're looking at is measuring from one line across a second to the third. Or if we have these little chisel tips out at the edge of our fill stitch, if it has these angled returns, we can go ahead and measure from this point to this point. And if it's 0.4 millimeters, that's also 4 embroidery points. And we know that that is fairly standard density. It's a little heavy depending on who you are. Some people go light, some people go heavy. Fairly standard density for a standard 40 weight thread, which is the normal, usual thread for machine embroidery. But that's the thing we have to get curious about. What is it that we're looking at? How do we address it in the software? What does it change about the look of our pieces? And that's what it is. So what is it? If we're talking about density, okay, what is it? Measurement of lines of stitching from each other. How is it measured? It's measured either in millimeters or embroidery points. And we also can find out that an embroidery point is 1/10 of a millimeter. How do I address that in software? In any of the softwares I know, if you're looking at a block of stitches, there will be a density measurement that either lets you set the millimeters spacing or the point spacing between those. There are some softwares that allow stitches per inch. I don't see them very frequently, so I don't talk about them a lot. My old software did allow for that, and we often ran about 66 back then, but that is a very, very different measurement that's not usually used. How does it change the way the design feels, looks, or runs? Well, putting a lot of needle penetrations really close together can make something denser and heavier, can make it curve or warp. And the more thread we put on something, the heavier it will be. And also figuratively, the tighter all that density is, it's going to move and warp and move things around. And also, like I said, as it gets heavier and heavier, if we're on very light garments, it can literally drag down, distort that garment. So how does it change the way the design looks, feels, or runs? And that the thing is, you think, okay, that's just stitch types. Nah, fabric construction. If I've got a jersey knit fabric, it has a vertical grain to it. So there's little troughs in it, literal little troughs and ribs in my jersey knit fabric. Or if we're in a knit cap, very big ribs, ribbed knit hat, big vertical troughs. Well, I know that if I have a stitch that's vertical and it lines up on that trough and I don't put anything under it to protect that, to either a material or underlay to keep it from off that surface, it's going to sink in because I'm thinking about the actual construction. So what is it? I mean, maybe I don't measure it, but I can think about how it's put together. I can measure the ribs if I need to see how much something stretches maybe. How do I address that in software? Well, I probably want my stitch angle to be different from those grooves. I probably want it to be going some other way if I can, or put something underneath it. So if I have vertical stitches, they don't fall in. Or use a topping material to keep my stitches from falling in while I'm sewing. So how do I address that in software? How do I address that with materials? How does it change the way the design looks, feels, or runs? Well, if I have vertical satin stitches, they're probably going to have a rough edge at the top, as some of the little satin stitch edges, they fall into those grooves. If I have a straight stitch detail, like that beautiful little piece we saw that had the circle R, the vertical spine of that circle R might fall right into the little groove and disappear. If I was working on a jersey knit, it might disappear and drop right inside the material. And if it drops right inside of the material, then it's going to sink away and we're not going to see that line. But we're thinking about the construction, right? And the same thing, stabilizers. Are they stable in all directions? Do they stretch in any one direction more than another? If so, then anything we do on that direction or counter to that direction, as far as stitch angles or putting a lot of density in, might cause more distortion because of that stabilizer. We have to think about it. Why do people tell you when you use a woven action back stabilizer to use 2 layers and put one on 45 degrees? Well, fabric construction again. It's a woven and even weave, so it's got just vertical and horizontal threads. What does that mean? Is that if you pull on the 45s, these distort into diamonds. They stretch really easy, but if you pull on the other directions, you're pulling against an actual thread. So one layer like this, and now we have all of our directions covered for stretch, because at any direction you try and pull or draw that together, you're pulling against the strong length of the thread. Physical nature of the thing. Threads. Why are threads going to change stuff? Well, the thickness of the thread is going to change how far apart we want to space things. And if it's thicker, it covers with less of those lines of thread. If it's fuzzy, it has additional thickness, even more than the stated thickness or weight of the thread. That fuzz causes more coverage to a degree. Also, contrast of colors, things like that. But we have to just maintain curiosity and understand these things on a basic level. So like I said, learn the lingo. So what does the lingo really mean though? How do we describe what we see or what we want? And invariably it's about how, like, what is it that we're trying to look at? It's a grouping of stitches and we want to be able to describe it. How is it measured? Oh, well, I'm trying to see how close together. It's measured by a distance between those lines. It's density. Now I know the lingo. How do I address that in software? There's a setting. How does it change things? More density is more coverage. Too much density is going to be heaviness and distortion. Less density is less coverage. We can see through it. Too little density, and we just look sparse. And the thing is, that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that's the effect we're going to get. If we want sparse, we can make sparse. If we want to see through, like our sketch fill, we can let it show through the background material on purpose, because we understand what these things mean. And like I said, it sounds very basic if you've been here a minute, but it's worthwhile to maintain. Like I said, beginner's mindset. How are we doing the beginner's mindset? Remember, expectations low, curiosity high, humility on. Yeah, we know this stuff, but trying to remember to think that way whenever we encounter something new is valuable. Expectations low, curiosity high, humility on board. That's how we want to do it. All right, so what's the third thing? Stitch and be present. And do I ever mean be present? If we want to be great embroiderers and great digitizers, the best thing we can do is watch designs run. And I'm going to make this ultra clear. Watch designs run. I mean watch. If you're trying to learn something new, you want to learn a technique, you want to understand how things work, one of the very best things you can do if you've got yourself an embroidery machine, if you're doing an apprenticeship somewhere, you're just starting out with somebody at their shop, you've got a friend who's letting you work on their machine, stay at that machine, pick a design. The best thing you can do is run known good files. So what this means, files that are from someone who knows what they're doing, that you know run well, maybe even a file a friend of yours ran and you love and the design looks great the way it's supposed to look. Run known good files and be present for the entire run. Why? We're going to see the interactions between stabilizer, fabric, machine movement, the needle going through the fabric stack and stabilizer, the thread and how it's actually operating while it's running. You're going to see that interaction, and combined with the way the file was put together, those 6 things are going to let you know a lot. And just like I can describe to you what it feels like to jump over a ditch, right? Let's say I tell you over and over about what speed you need to hit at, the angle you should lift off at. Maybe you want to lead off with your dominant foot. And I'm probably saying this wrong because I'm not jumping over a lot of ditches these days. I can describe to you over and over how to jump off a ditch or hit a baseball or ride a bike. But the human brain is an amazing thing that processes a lot of information and puts it together and creates all these lovely connections as you're observing something. And if you jump over a ditch, I bet you know better about how your body's going to do it a second time. If you ride a bike a while, when you go back, that muscle memory is present, and you can analyze on the fly how things are changing. And if you watch designs run that you have hooped yourself, that you have set up yourself, and you watch the entire run and see the interactions as they're happening. And even when there's mistakes, you see the distortions as they're happening. Stitches are pulling tighter. Stacks of stitches are pushing away from each other and getting taller. Your uppercase block eye is narrow and tall now. The fabric is moving out of the way of the apparent motion of the needle. We see waves of fabric moving. We see things shifting in the hoop. We can see how our tearaway stabilizer starts to degrade when there's a ton of stitches going through it. And we see it getting a little looser as it runs. This stuff is invaluable experience that you will process in a way that you can't process by listening to me tell you, or listening to any of us tell you, or even necessarily watching videos of stuff run. I think there is really something to being there, hearing it, seeing it, being present for it, if you can. if at all possible, the chances you're going to be a better embroiderer, better digitizer for the rest of your career, if especially at the beginning you are very present. Yes, it is lovely that we can, in some cases, especially with a great file or with a machine that has sensitive, thread break sensors, stitch and walk away, or turn our heads and hoop, or do something else. If you are in the throes of learning, of experimentation, watch the designs run. Be present for it. I know it's a drag. I've watched jacket backs before. Sometimes it's a long time. You're probably not going to maintain full focus for hours of a 1.5 by 1.5 panel. You're not probably going to do that, right? At the same time, for most designs, for your beginning designs, for your left chest, for your hats, you can spare a 20-minute, 30-minute run, especially when you are just starting out. Watching designs run will absolutely get it going. Absolutely. And it's a worthwhile thing to do. And Cindy says, after 499, the same logo, can I walk away? Sure. That's not the phase of experimentation. That's not the phase of, also problem solving. Here's what I'll tell you though. If on logo 500 you start having intermittent problems with something and it's still having a problem and you're still walking away and then coming back and scratching your head, then I'm going to shake my finger at you again and go, if you're having problems and trying to isolate a problem either on the machine or with a file, you got to go watch that thing again. So yeah, I know we're making you laugh. Gail's laughing at me, but it's totally true. It's totally true. It's a worthwhile thing to look at, right? Understand that you're going to have to be present for some of that, especially if you're trying something totally new. Watch designs run and do that work, right? So, like I said, important part of this thing, watch designs run. So, I like to say that's a big deal. So what do we have here, right? We're lining these things up again. Let's go back to what we said so far. We've got look at embroidery. It's important. Learn how machines work. Learn the lingo. Obviously, we want to do that. And then we're going to watch designs run. And we're going to make sure that we stitch and be present. We watch designs run. We run known good files. So these are all important things. I'm going to get to the last thing in a second. First thing I want to do is go back to some of those pictures. So we're going to do a little more talking and analysis and stuff as well. Well, actually, we'll do that after. We'll go back to pictures and talk afterwards. Because actually, I want to get to the fifth thing. If you're only here for the hour, let's get to the fifth thing because I think this is important. We'll go through the process first. Don't get me wrong. We're going to talk about some more stuff. I'm going to show you some more stuff and discuss these things just a little bit toward the end. But if you're just here for the hour, let's get through the last thing. Because this is probably one of the most critical things to do, especially as you continue in your career. You've been doing this for a while. Take time to experiment. And why did I say experiment here? I've got two meanings here. Because believe me, I also want you to play. Play is important because the word play has an inference of being consequence-free. We're going to talk about that literally in a second. I'm going to use those same terms again. But the reason I say experiment here is that I would love for you to go into testing something new or trying something out with the idea that I have a concept of what I think it's going to do, but like an experimenter, like a scientist, this is a hypothesis. And I don't have a desire for it to be one way or the other necessarily, especially if I'm trying something brand new. What I want to do at first when I'm watching it run is just absorb what happens. I want to see how it interacts. I want to see what's going on and take notes. I know that sounds crazy. Take notes if you're trying to figure something out, but I'm going to watch it with my curiosity going. So beginner's mindset, expectations low, curiosity high, humility on. We're probably going to mess this thing up. You and me, we are in this together. We're going to mess some stuff up before we're done. Take the time to experiment, but with the concept that we're gathering data. That's why I say experiment. Lots of people say play, and I agree. And I'm going to talk about it in that way, right? Because it should be play to a degree. But when I say experiment, I mean, know that you're gathering data. This is data we're gathering so that we can make a new hypothesis and try again. We can come up with a new way of doing things, and that requires us gathering data. But what I'm saying is this. I know we get busy. I know things are tough. Yes, there are times where we're not going to make this time where the needles must keep running up and down at all times to make things work for us. And I know that there's times to experiment that aren't play, where we have a goal in mind and we're trying to solve a problem for someone. Mike, who's here in the comments, did some incredible experimentation to do some great stuff for the military. wonderful military patchwork and had to do a lot of just figuring things out on his own and did incredible work that is very valuable. And that I would not consider that play necessarily. Now, somebody like me, I'm a little crazy. I might consider it play to work on one of these problem solving runs, but it can get frustrating. It's not just for fun. The thing is, we need to take that time as much as we can. I'm not saying you have to guarantee a percentage. Folks at Google back in the day used to really have a 10% kind of concept where 10% was essentially playtime, free time. And if you use Gmail today, Gmail came out of a 10% project. I know I say that a lot, but imagine that you might make something very useful out of that playtime, out of that unstructured time. But what I will say is this, there's many ways we can go about this, but there's some things to keep in mind. I really want you to think of it by and large, whenever we can, as consequence-free play. Like I said, beginner's mindset. We know humility's on board. We might not get this right. That's cool. Expectations low, curiosity high. We want to play with something. We want to try out a new technique. We want to see what's going on, and maybe it gets done. Maybe we work something out. And if it turns out great, we can show the world. But the concept is this. If it bothers you, if the expectations are something that is weighing on you, then that's fine. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell a soul. Do this for yourself. Don't do it for content. Don't do it with the concept that if it doesn't turn out in a way that you can share, that you failed. If you want to make content about it, if you're cool with sharing the failure in your process, that's awesome. We need more people who are willing to expose that so that the rest of us who are perfectionists don't freak out. But the concept is to do this to sate your curiosity. You do it to make something cool that keeps you engaged. You do it to support something that you love. And ultimately, you do it for yourself. Not that the project has to be for you, but you do it for your own reasons. Because I want to increase my mastery, because I have a technique that I am curious about that I want to try, because I want to expand into something and I think that it might be interesting for me to do. Hey, because it's a business thing that I think is valuable, but we do it for ourselves first, and we do it without the concept that it has to come out right to be okay and for us to be okay. So yeah, self-directed projects are awesome for this. Doing stuff that is just for you, that you're just curious, your curiosity is feeding that, is dragging you along for the ride. That's fantastic. It's also great if you have a concept and you're like, I really want to explore this concept. One of the ones that started out in my career was patches. The first patches I did were just for me because I wanted to try it. And then I was one of the few people who said yes to patches in my town at first when we were doing small run under a dozen patches. We were doing them in-house and nobody else said yes to a lot of customers. And it led to us doing work for like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and, and all those stuff, the night shift for NBC, stuff that you don't think you would do. And that was a passion project, a play project. It was self-directed when I first started. I told the company, I think I can do this and I want to play. They said, go for it. And I played. And it turned out to be great. But I also experimented, had some failures, had some stuff that I didn't like as much as other stuff, found out methods that worked and didn't work for the kind of result I wanted. I had to take time to experiment. But eventually, did I use it for content? Yeah. Eventually, I used it to show people stuff. I'm using them for content now sometimes. I use them to explain what I was able to do and to use them as samples for the customers. But if they had turned out terrible, I'm under no contract to show anybody. I'm not going to have to. So really, you do self-directed projects. Some of the other things I've done too, charity projects. And once again, I don't have to do it because someone asked. I do it ahead of time. I offer it after I've done the work. If I know there's a charity who is worthwhile, who could use some new shirts, I make a logo because I feel like it. And then once it's good and I'm happy with it, I can give it to the charity and give them the shirts as a surprise. If it doesn't turn out, if I tear out what's left of my hair, as little as it may be, that's up to me. I don't have to show anybody. And making it consequence-free like that can give you a little bit of an edge if you're someone who has problems getting hung up over it being perfect, knowing someone's going to look at it, knowing that it has to be for a reason, that someone's waiting on the other side. If that's you, which it can be for a lot of people, do something fun. And honestly, don't tell anyone. Don't do it for the content. Do it to sate your curiosity. Do it to make something cool. Do it to support something you love, and do it for yourself. Like I said, do it for yourself. That is super important. So these are the big 5 things. I've got other things I want to say, and I've got a little bit of bonus here. But like I said, those are the things that really make sense to me to tell everybody. we want to look at embroidery and analyze it. But we want to look at it with that real curiosity. How is it put together? What am I looking at? What can I do in my software on my machine to make this thing, if anything? And if I can't, what can I do that's similar? What are the qualities of the thing I'm looking at that I might be able to work on? I want to learn how the machine works. I want to know how these things are formed. How do I form a stitch and what's going on the machine? Learn the lingo. How do I describe things to other people so we can discuss it so I can learn more? What am I doing with this stuff? How is it measured? How do I address it? What does it change about the design, the thing that I'm trying to figure out, the stitch type, the threads, the stabilizers? I need to stitch and be present. I want to watch things run so I can really get as the Icelanders say, below the lower jaw understanding, a real understanding to my core of what's going on in the embroidery hoop, not just what someone told me, what a setting says, or a thing that I should do. I actually know why and how things are actually going to run. I'm going to be present. I'm going to watch designs run for real. And like I said, ultimately, I'm going to take time to experiment. I'm going to take time to experiment. And in that experimentation, I'm watching all those things run. And then, of course, last but not least, the bonus item before I talk about some other stuff in the little bonus time here. The other bonus item is branch out. Branch out. If you saw the initial thumbnail for the video, I'll pop it back up for a second, and you'll see there I am. And I'm talking with the folks from Natsina, and that's just one group of a million people who I get to talk to at shows. But over here in the bottom right-hand corner with me in the little blue shirt that you see, that's me branching out. I'm talking to people, and I took way too long to do this. I learned largely by myself. The first months of my career as a digitizer were entirely kind of, sleeping under the desk, working on this thing, trying to get it to work, taking things home, reading everything I could, sampling all the time. And I didn't reach out to anybody for a long time. I didn't really know there was somebody else to reach out to. Particularly, or how to reach out to somebody for a very long time. But once I did, there was a lot there for me. And honestly, especially for someone who's trying to stay in that beginner's mindset and that mindset of understanding, we can do more, right? This is the thing. Join a community. Find a community of like-minded people who are working maybe in your software, but it doesn't have to be just other embroiderers, people who are making cool stuff, people who are into what you're into, whether that's cosplay, it could be bridal stuff, could be lace. It doesn't have to be logos like I do. It doesn't have to be that kind of work. It can be all manner of work. I know one of the things I'm passionate about is fonts and lettering. And funny enough, it's a subset of what we do. I think more about fonts and lettering than most people do. But that's the thing that I've always loved. There's entire sessions of this on this channel about the lingo of fonts and lettering because it's something that I've always loved. But that's the thing. Your community and your tribe is something that'll help you with that. But join an embroidery community of some kind. Visit a trade show. Not only do you see all this cool stuff and all this equipment and machinery, there's just more of what's possible. Yeah, they show you some stunner pieces that don't make sense commercially, that are beautiful on the machine but take forever, or a lot of extra material work, or really are not things that every commercial customer might pay for. But visit a trade show. And especially if you're a craft person, there's so many cool creative things going on at the various regional trade shows and craft shows that are out there, just because people are making cool stuff and sharing it. And you're going to meet other people who are like you, who are interested in this stuff. Take a class. Like I said, I've only ever taken a portion of one in my entire life. I've taken one class. Now I've taken lots of classes outside of the embroidery world. By the time I was taking classes, I always tell this story. The first time I ever took a class, I was at this class and they started talking about design analysis, something you've heard me talk about before. And they're talking about how you would break a design down. And I pull out of my neat little folder of things that I brought with me to talk about embroidery that I was studying, a design analysis that I had done where I took apart a design and I analyzed each of the layers and all the densities and wrote them all down, and the stitch lengths and the stitch angles. And I had notes about how everything went together. I said, this is what I'm doing. Does this look like what you're talking about? And the person who was teaching the class grabbed that sheet of paper and ran up to the front offices and copied it and handed it out. So my experience with classes is a little different than yours. But what I am going to say is I have now sat in on classes as someone who is already an educator. I sat in on Joe's class, Joe Kramer's class, as you saw those samples. Did he blow my mind with a setting or something that I've never seen before in my life? No, but that's okay. All right. I mean, he did show me some very inspirational, cool things that I didn't think about doing. Did it reformat my entire knowledge of embroidery? No. Did I learn some cool stuff that I might not have thought about doing, or did I get inspired to try some stuff that was a concept up here, but I had never seen in the thread? Absolutely. And it was valuable. Plus, it just got me hyped up to try something new. And ultimately, if you're somebody who's been doing this for a while, teach teach a class, run a podcast, be a guest on a show, teach someone else who's asking a question, and do it also with that same humility you have with the beginner's mindset. Knowing that they're coming from somewhere else, that they may have other ideas, and understanding that they may not take it directly from you immediately. That's fine. But share, because the other thing is, once you teach, you have to format what you know in such a way that it's intelligible to other people. And in doing so, you crystallize the knowledge that's running around inside your head random, and it becomes something a little more solid. And you start to question it a little bit. If you know that someone else who's just starting is starting to look at what you're teaching, you'll question it and go, let me make sure these things all make sense. Let's question some of those things that I believe and make sure that they make sense. And hey, you might even find yourself back at the machine. You might even watch a design run to make sure you're right. Suffice it to say, there's stuff to be done there. All right. So for everybody who's still here, I'm going to go ahead and grab a couple things to take a look at. We're going to just look at some different stuff for sure. But yeah, I've got a couple comments, then I'm going to show you some pictures and just chat for a minute, and then we'll let you guys go. Because it's a longer one anyway, but we won't go for the full length I often do. But yeah, but I love this. Cindy says, okay, I'll never walk away. No, you can walk away. You can walk away when you need to. Also, by the way, if you're a commercial person and you're not hooping the next run while the first one's running, what you doing out there? Hoop that next run. Get ready. But it's true. Yeah, Gail says, walk away and the needle will break. Yep. Happened many a time. They know when you walk away. It feels that way, doesn't it? The gremlins are waiting, right? The gremlins are waiting to grab that thread and shred it for you. But this is true. Cindy says, it's important to watch. Sometimes you'll get great ideas just from watching a logo. Absolutely. And especially watching somebody else's work. To this day, I watch other people's designs. I look at other people's work and go, you know what? Maybe that's the thing I should try. Or they decided to render that shape in a different way than I would have, or a different stitch type. That's interesting. I'm going to look at that. I'm going to take a look at that for the next time. It's now in the bank. So the next time I need to do something similar to what I just saw, there's a different concept that I might not have tried. It's really easy for us to standardize and get ourselves permanently fixated into a standard set of settings. But the way we get beyond that is being, like I said, being curious about it. And by the way, Mike, yeah, man, love all the way around. This is a concept I mean, right? I mean this one from the heart. That's why you can tell I'm talking about it a little too much and a little too fast. Justin says, I have many failed concepts that ended up on the editing floor. 100%. There's always this joke that goes around for designers where you name the file final, and then final 2, final 3, final 5, final 6. Then you start getting into the colorful words. And I will tell you guys, back in the day when we only had 8 characters to name files, and yes, my machines, I might not be quite that old, but my machines sure were. Back in the day, we only had 8 characters to name stuff. I got really creative with how to end up with a swear and a title for a design in the same 8 characters. It's great. I can really write a fantastic license plate. Suffice it to say, sometimes you got multiple versions of a thing before you go. And it's totally fine to save multiple versions of your file as you go. I do it all the time. Most of the fonts I work on, I'm probably on version 6 by the time I get done, because I'll have several characters where I'm trying to make a design or make a decision on the design work. Frequently, when you're working on text or fonts, you guys know you have to make concessions for embroidery to work correctly. When I'm working on fonts, there's a lot of time where I'm redrawing entire characters to work for the purpose. And I'm not sure about it. I'm not a typographer. Got a lot of practice in, but I'm not a typographer. So sometimes I have to make multiple versions of a Q. Believe me, I'm saving several Qs. Sometimes you just have to, but that's okay. Those other Qs aren't a waste. They were part of the process that got me to the final Q that everybody knows and loves. That's a little heavy, but a little bit true, right? All right, so let's bring up the images just for a minute, and I'll just talk about why I threw these on here, because why it's fun. We got some fun images and some stuff to show. Like, charity work. There was somebody on one of the boards who was asking for a volunteer logo. I believe it's a World War II volunteer pin called the Ruptured Duck. That's what the joking way of calling it is this eagle through this ring. But it's something where they're like, yeah, I just want it to be one color, kind of tonal metallic style. And so I've stuck it together. If you are someone trying to learn carved satins and trying to do something similar, you want to see what it's like to do a carved piece, you could do a piece like this and do it for someone who's giving away award badges and say, hey, try this out. See how it works, right? Let's see what's going on with that thing and try it out. Also, sometimes you are doing it for the content, but it turns out okay. One of these pieces is done for Stitches Magazine way back in the day, but this is kind of a cool piece. I did a light it was called a fleur-de-lis ancestor is what I called the piece. And the concept is the fleur-de-lis was actually based off of like an iris, not a lily. I know that's the concept, but the iris and how it looks like this. So I had this really light stitching set of irises, and on top of it, I did a heat press transfer. And the other thing I'm going to tell you guys, this was a fun project, not a project that was super commercial. If I was doing this super commercially, I'd have these transfers redone. The original transfer had a bunch more stones in the center of the fleur-de-lis, and I actually pulled those stones out. I scraped them out real quick before I did the transfer because this was a concept. I wanted to look at a concept multimedia design, and honestly, this concept of light embroidery fills that then had rhinestones over it, I used later in actual commercial work. I wish I had a good sample of that with me right now. I actually did some for different places. Great thing is when you have somebody who has stone in their name and has enough folks on their staff that like rhinestones, they're usually a shoe-in for throwing something in with their logo or their design. It's kind of cool. Like I said, with the original patch stuff, some of the original patches I ever did and kind of produced and made kind of a standard operating procedure was the Harvest Hero series, right? So I did this series of Garden Gorilla, and the Harvest Hero is one of the ones that I used and showed, but the original one was the Garden Gorilla patch. This was my first custom patch set with rockers that I did, and it was a patch style design, but I also worked it out as patches, and I didn't show the original couple patches because I had a couple where the borders came apart because I was doing them in a way that really wasn't working. I had way too little kind of meat in the edge of that patch border. But the Seed Bomber patch, the Harvest Heroes patch, and the Garden Gorilla, I drew those myself. I did these from an original sketch. And it was all about the concept of guerrilla gardening, and it was just for fun. It was because guerrilla gardening sounded so cool. I was like, wow, we got these two really weird concepts, this mix-up of the term gardening and guerrilla. So we've got war fighters and gardening together. How do we make something for that? I'm like, well, the proper thing for that is military-style patches, right? So I put that together and ran it. But once we have those samples, I can show those samples if I want to, and I can tell a customer, and we did. We showed samples and said, yeah, we can make these. We can make these right now. No big deal. We've got the materials. What did I start with? Materials that I already had for the process of doing applique. I had an old cutter that was literally like stashed in a cupboard that I had resurrected. It was a Roland Cam 1 parallel port cutter. If you're old enough to know what a parallel port is, I'm sorry about your knees and back. But suffice it to say, it was worthwhile, and a good 60-degree blade will cut twill pretty well. You guys these days who have the crickets with glue traps on them so that they actually hold things down that are not made for cutting, you're lucky. It's a lot better than back when we had to build our own roll feed materials out of like a masking sheet and the material itself. But I used a lot of material that was made for cutting because it was what was there, what was available. What did I do? I experimented. Also, you're seeing a lot of little Viking looking stuff. Why? You guys know that my original degree is medieval studies. English with a medieval studies background. I did a lot of Anglo-Saxon work, and I was very interested in also pre-Christian Scandinavia. So you're going to see a lot of like Viking age and earlier stuff from Scandinavia that's going to be here, and also Anglo-Saxon stuff. But you'll see like I started making my own patterned borders. These came from rune stones. So you'll see a lot of stuff from Sweden. If Josta's around, you'll probably recognize some stuff there. You'll also see some Anglo-Saxon stuff like the Pitney brooch here. See that Pitney brooch? There's the original. But if you look at some of the design stuff I've done later, I probably have a copy of the Pitney brooch on here. But I've got different stuff I've sent to people. You'll see very multiple pieces like this, though. Here's this horse. You see this horse piece right here. That is an original bronze mount, Viking Age style. And then here's the piece that I made from it, where I drew it. Honestly, I drew it out a little bit more in the Ordinance style to a degree. I kind of exaggerated some stuff, but we did some cool design work with it. And in doing that, I'm experimenting with stitch angles and stitch types and treatments and colors. And I did that self-directed projects. Do I sell them on my website? Yeah, I do. But at the same time, these were self-directed or done for friends, done for different reasons. Working on some of these other pieces. We've got jacket backs and then we have that have runes on them. We've got this piece with a version of Ullr, the god Ullr, from one of the stones. We've got an Odin bag that I did. We have those were done for fun, right? Those are done for friends and for fun. This was an example to show that I could use fuzzy sewing thread very much as you see Joe doing in his pieces. I was just explaining, yes, you absolutely can use fuzzy sewing thread and run it through your machine. Sometimes you got a lot of lint. If you got the right kind of thread that's treated well, a slightly fuzzy sewing thread like this can make a really interesting look if you lighten down your densities a bit. And that's a piece from a rune stone as well. And, we've got all those pieces. Also, things like this. I wanted to emulate knit. So I went ahead and figured out some manual stitch patterns to emulate knit work, and it looks like an Intarsia knit. So I'm being inspired by Intarsia knits, and I'm digitizing that in my software and running that with some Burmalonico, some cotton thread. Now, admittedly, Burmalonico, I like Burmalana better. The wool blend is less fuzzy and linty, but the cotton thread does have a nice matte finish to it. It's nice and thick. So here's some, 12 weight thread we're running, and we're getting some pretty big, thick, chunky setups from it. Why are we getting that? Because I'm doing multi-pass stitches. This is stuff that's not normal, right? Or pieces like this, the 7-color blend. 7-color blend done manually. And it's a really nice gradient blend. This is not color real. This is multiple colors layered together. But the original piece, even though I've done tons of blends for the commercial world, I hadn't done a full rainbow like this before I actually did it for somebody who asked a question. So this is teaching. Somebody asked a question in Images magazine, and the people from Images said, "Is this even possible?" And they showed me some art that looked very much like this. And I was like, well, I've got a lovely Madeira thread chest with all the colors, and I got a little bit of time. Let's see what I can get done. And within this, and this is my thumb right here. So though I have a big thumb, it's not giant. It's a couple inches, and you're getting a 7-color blend. Is there a lot of work involved in that? Absolutely. But can you do it? Yeah. And in doing that, I was able to explain to some people what rainbow threads look like. And when I did the sampling, I did a couple of runs because it turned out that the order of stitching mattered a little bit more than I thought it did. And I decided to change my stitch order because it did make a little bit of difference to how high the midtones were. I was happier to get the midtones done a little bit differently than my original concept. And it's something that I talked about and taught. And like I said, you'll see some other sample pieces that are just for fun. I did this strap work that's part of those knots that you saw before. Well, good friend of the show and friend of mine, Stricka Knits. We have her. That's her company. She made these dresses with that have that strap work on it, and she did that for fun. But it's also something she showed for her website. What turned into my work on pixel art was originally because somebody said you can't make a QR code back in the first age of QR codes. You can't make a QR code under this much space. Like it's got to be 3 inches on the side. And I'm like, nah, less than 2. I can absolutely do it. I just had to be careful about my digitizing, and I did it with overlap satin stitches. That same QR code setup became part of my understanding to do pixel style stitch work, which I did later. Those examples, those tests are important. And then sometimes you do stuff for yourself. This is the high table from my wedding. I'm not going to show you all the people, but that little medallion at the table, that is me learning to work on really, really fine materials with a fairly dense satin, and it worked pretty well. Unfortunately, it being packed up put more puckers in it than my embroidery did. But I learned how to work on satin more than I ever had because a big, wide, and quite frankly, inexpensive swath of satin is something that you have to get done. Something you might have to work on. You're doing sashes, and the pain that I knew from doing a fairly large, kind of a 10-inch circle of pretty high satins on that satin piece. So satin stitch is pretty dense on that piece, right? So dense enough to show. And sometimes just trying to show somebody some of the settings I've used before to do tulle. So here's a really light tulle for bridal. And I wanted to show somebody an auto split or a length limited satin stitch to get some shine, but still have something lay flat and not be loopy. And I did that texture in the back of this kind of Lombardic Eid. But I did this piece partially for fun. I've done some of this floral work before, but I reconstructed it in Stitch Artist for Embrilliance because I wanted to show them in this software exactly how it would look and how it was put together and what those settings would look like. Same thing here. This is a revision of a previous piece I did. You guys may have seen the Dream Big piece. Well, the Dream Big Stay Bold piece, I wanted to show somebody a way to do that in very short steps using graphical operators, so punching out shapes. So I said, all right, let me show you what it would look like if you could take a regular true type font and go through 5 or 6 operations and end up with a cool looking letter. And I did that. I did that mocking one of my original designs, but did that in Stitch Artist 3 for Embrilliance to show somebody how graphical operators like and, or, so we're talking about like unioning things, punching things out and flattening them, how we could use that to make something interesting out of an existing vector object. And we did that with this piece. These things are just experiments. Also, there's always that retail research portion of it. I want to try and mock something I've seen. Another fun thing, practicing for myself to make chain stitches. You guys have heard this story before. And once again, Stricka Knits made these that I practiced and was goofing around and drew this little Viking head. When I drew the little Viking head, little did I know that she would then take this and put it on mittens and sell this into a retail store up in Minnesota. So there are people out there running around with my lunchtime sketch on their hands. It's been a few years, so they might not have them anymore. But if you had one of those in your cabinet, then you probably have this guy to thank for it. Goofy Eric sitting on my machines right here, sampling on the Tajimas back in the day, looking through stuff, trying to run different things, messing around with materials, and just having a go, trying to play with it. And so that's why I show you all this stuff. I'm like, there's a lot of pathways to get where you want to go. And even when you are supposedly there, you are at the place you want to go, that doesn't mean you're stopping. You're still playing. You're letting your friends run your designs. You're making new things. Hey, even when someone asks you for something fun, you can do something great with it. Stitches asked me to do this fashion shoot thing. What we have here, this central piece on her chest, is built off of some Frankish, some Frankish work. So this is like archaeological finds, and there's an Anglo-Saxon helmet plate that I took the belt from. And I'll actually bring those up on screen just for the heck of it. We've got some other stuff like my patches, the Harvest Heroes patch, but we look at some of these other things. We got the Valkyries that I do. I do a bunch of these little Valkyrie designs. So let me actually zoom those in correctly. There's the Valkyrie from Tuna, the Valkyrie from Åland in Sweden. There's the Vendel neck piece. There's one of these ones I also did. I put this on on a spaghetti strap top, but what is it made out of? It's plates from a Vendel era helmet. So pre-Viking age Swedish helmet. Why? Because I can, because it was for fun and somebody asked me to make something cool looking. It was cool looking to me. That the knot that I showed you before, the Tjangvida hand knot, and I'm sure I'm saying something incorrectly, especially depending on modern pronunciations, but showing people different stitch types, overlapping, how to build your own underlay. All of these things were done, though, originally on a design that was fun for me. A design that I liked and I drew out from a picture stone and recreated to show people overs, unders, the tabs that you can make to make strokes connect up and look like they go over and under, even if you had to run something before it should have been run in the sequence of that kind of overlap and underlay. These are just ways we play, right? Those jackets that I did for friends, the little Uller jacket with the runic inscriptions, like I said, the Harvest Heroes patch, these are all part of that play. The neck piece for that dress, here it is, the Anglo-Saxon neck piece. And also, might I add, if we look at the actual dress, the eyes on the actual dress are made of rhinestones. They were high-quality rhinestones that were the actual eyes on that dress. And those rhinestones are laid down on top of a mesh of stitching, and they heat fix to that mesh just fine through that garment. So me playing around with rhinestones over light fills, right there, you're seeing it live. That was something that I did and played with. So yeah, that's part of that whole setup, is working on, working on those different pieces and understanding how things are put together and analyzing them. Also, some really cool kind of overlapped texture work in here using overlap satin stitches instead of carving so that I didn't have gaps in it. But it was something that I played with. The belt piece is made out of this repeating Anglo-Saxon motif that you're seeing here. So this repeating Anglo-Saxon motif became the belt on that dress that that lovely model was wearing. But hey, that's my goofy stuff that I like. The things that kept me curious, that kept me interested, are how we made that work. Made these little button covers, and it's once again a little Urnus style medallion. The bag that I did with a copy of Odin from Tjangvida Estonian, I believe. All of these things, right? The Viking face, it was just a way that I was testing my custom chain stitch motif that I was building. Tested that out, let my friend use it, and she ran with it. Carolyn ran with it and made those pieces. Thor's hammers for a good friend of mine. A bag featuring a redrawn version of Thor from a standing stone as well, that happens to have an inscription that I wrote in it. All of these things were part of the fun. But the thing is, maintaining that fun, maintaining your ability to play, maintaining your curiosity is part of how you're going to continue to do it. Were those pieces very complicated? No, a lot of those aren't. I mean, the shading, the manual blend in that 7-color rainbow, that's complicated, but frankly, it's a lot of pre-planning and counting. There are other pieces I've done that are much more complex. There are animals and shading, and there's, car work, stuff like that. And like I said, I do still analyze. I still look at other designs. Not all of it's going to be the same kind of work. And frankly, we still do it to this day. We still analyze, we still look at things, and we just have a better understanding as we go through with it. And frankly, you never know where something's going to go. And like I said, it can be anything. I'll bring up a couple more, just last couple for the heck of it. As you guys know, creator of Embroiderers, Brian Bailey, he brought something in. He had bought a cool Tommy Bahama shirt, and we're like, okay, maybe baseball in the desert's not my thing, but look at all these stitch types. And part of the things we realized, we're like, man, these stitches look exceedingly fine. Why does it look so fine? There's a lot of 60 weight thread in this piece. where even in places where I wouldn't use it, they use some 60-weight thread and they get this really fine layout. It looks really good. Things are laying flat and very shiny. Then we look and go, wow, everybody's so worried about gradients, but what do? Flat cut, real flat cut on two colors that are really close together, and it looks really nice. Also, if we look at the top lettering on it, what do we have in here? Look at that. That is just like a 50% fill blend or an accordion blend. Red on pink. Heck, it's got a big flat line right here, and this is a high-end garment. Maybe we overthink it too much, especially because when we were looking at it from a distance, we were getting enough of that gradient. It looked pretty good. Maybe we're putting on the goggles and we're just putting on the jeweler's loop a little too much when we're doing our blending. But we also got to see all these cool renderings. I'm like, okay, wow, man, they used some really kind of tilted satin stitches to make those spines on the cactus. We can see we've got a lot of vertical fill going on here too. We've got a lot of fill angles, but nothing is it anything crazy that I don't know how to do? No, but looking at it all together gave me some concepts or some thoughts. And definitely I thought about, man, maybe sometimes a fill and 60-weight thread is worthwhile if it looks that fine, if it looks that nice. And certainly different kind of concepts, different ways to render things. Why not? Look at a sample, check it out, see what it's going to show you and play. And you never know, even sometimes when you're playing and testing, this piece that I did for our launch of Merrily, our patch making software, I did this piece and I just drew this up. I grabbed some icons and looked at stuff online. I was like, okay, what's like kind of a semi-mythical story kind of thing that I can name a town after? And it's funny. I said, okay, Village of New Hamlin. You guys know the Pied Piper? The Pied Piper comes to Hamlin and takes all the kids when he doesn't get paid for piping. I made up a fake town in my head of New Hamlin. And so their logo would be the Pied Piper. I just drew this up. Now, this is a single color. It's not crazy. It's not like that. But this little piece, it illustrated what I needed it to. It's like, hey, this is what a patch would look like if you made it with the software. And here's a little in joke for anybody who gets it. Maintaining that curiosity and fun is part of how you make all your projects better. It's part of how you make things work. And you never know when little things that you do for yourself become things that really impress customers, become things that feed you both literally and figuratively throughout your career. That's the little 3D wings, this 3D lace. Do you think I never ever needed to use freestanding 3D lace for my commercial work? Maybe not really, but did it really impress the heck out of people from Optimistic Deadbeat when we did it on this quilted print piece for them? Yeah, they thought that was some really cool stuff. Were other people in the home and craft market doing it? Absolutely they were. It's not groundbreaking, but it gave me a chance to play, and it made sense sometimes commercially too. You never know. By the way, everything is commercially sensible if you get priced well enough to make a profit. All right, folks. So bonus time over, show over. Let's let it go from there. The one thing I would like to say is if you take nothing away from this today, by all means, establish and maintain your curiosity. That's going to see you through almost all of this, whether it's technical learning, whether it's trying new things, whether it's getting inspired, no matter what it is, keeping a clear head about things and maintaining an air of curiosity, wanting to learn and wanting to know and wanting to play will be the biggest thing for you. Let the beginner mindset be your guide this coming week. And what does that mean? Keep your expectations of yourself low. It's not that you don't want to have high expectations to do great work, but don't hang your value as a creator, as a person, as an embroiderer on every single sample. If you keep making more, the body of work keeps growing and your percentage of wins gets higher. There's so many ways to win this thing. Keep your curiosity high all the time. Make sure you're curious and thinking about things. Don't turn into a brick. Don't turn into a concrete head. Let stuff in and keep your eyes open. And hey, keep the humility on. You can always learn something else. But if you say or feel like I know it all already, it just can't get through the screen. So beginner's mindset's good for you. I'm going to try myself to keep that up and make some time to experiment. And hey, some consequence-free play if you can. Embroidery is pretty darn cool when you get right down to it. All right, folks, it's good to have you guys here, and I really can't wait to see you again next week. If you have things you want to hear about, if there are technical things, you do want to do another small text run, that's totally cool. Let me know in the comments, and we'll get back to it. But I thought, with so many people coming into the space, so many new people asking me questions, I felt I just had to get out there, get ahead of it, and say, these are the things, the mindset things, and the practice things we can do to keep that career going for life. All right, guys, have a good week, and get out there and play, and keep that curiosity high.